The day my mother's attorney read that will out loud, I watched my brother Deshaun's face go from grief to rage in about 4 seconds flat. I watched my sister Pamela grab the edge of the conference table like she needed something to hold on to. I watched my other sister, Renee, pull out her phone right there in the middle of the reading and start dialing her own attorney. And I watched Kora, who had worked in my mother's house for 19 years. Kora, who had shown up every single morning at 7:30 and left every evening at 6. Kora, who knew how my mother took her coffee and which hymns she liked to hum on Sunday mornings, and exactly how many blankets she needed when the temperature dropped below 50 degrees. Kora, who knew that Mama's left knee was worse than her right and always parked the car close to the door without being asked. Kora sat completely still, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward. She didn't smile, she didn't cry, she didn't look at any of us. She just waited, like she had been waiting a long time already, and a little longer wasn't going to change anything. My name is Simone Gloria Whitfield, named after my mother, which she always said was either a blessing or a warning depending on the day. I'm 44 years old, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I work as a project manager for a healthcare company. I have a husband, 2 kids, a mortgage, and a calendar that is always too full and never full of the right things. And what I'm about to tell you is the story of a woman who spent 63 years on this earth, watching the people she loved the most take everything she gave them and ask for more. A woman who never raised her voice about it, never issued ultimatums, never sat her children down and told them how much it hurt. She just kept a record, in her heart, in her memory, and eventually in a will. My mother, Gloria Whitfield, was born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1952, the third of 5 children. Her own mother worked as a domestic, cleaning homes, cooking meals, raising other people's children while her own waited at home. My mother watched that and decided early that she was going to do something different, something that required a degree and a title and a uniform that commanded respect when she walked into a room. She became a nurse, a registered nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, where she worked for 31 years. She was the kind of nurse that patients asked for by name, the kind who remembered your birthday and brought you a little something on bad days, and sat with you when the doctor's news was worse than expected. She saved her money carefully, the way people who grew up without money learn to do. She bought a 4-bedroom house in Stone Mountain, Georgia in 1987, paid cash for the down payment, something she was quietly proud of the rest of her life. She raised 4 children, mostly on her own after my father passed when I was 9, and she did it without asking anyone for anything she couldn't eventually give back. She did all of that, quietly, without complaint, without asking for recognition or praise or even acknowledgement. She just did what needed doing and expected that the people she loved would do the same. And the 4 of us, Deshaun, Pamela, Renee, and me, we grew up in that house, in the warmth of everything she built, and then we left. We went to college, built careers, started families, moved to other cities, and slowly, without meaning to, or maybe without caring enough to stop it, we let the distance grow. I don't say that to be cruel to my siblings. I say it because it's the truth, and because the letter made it impossible to pretend otherwise, and I would rather tell you the truth about who we were than protect a version of us that doesn't exist anymore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to tell you about Kora first. Kora James came to work for my mother in the winter of 2004. Mama had just turned 52, and her knees were starting to give her trouble. Years of standing on hospital floors had taken their toll, and her orthopedic surgeon had told her she needed to reduce the time she spent on her feet. She was still working at the hospital then, part-time, and she needed someone to help around the house a few days a week. Cooking, cleaning, running errands, that sort of thing. She put up a notice at her church, and Kora responded within a week. Kora was 41 at the time, a widow with 3 grown children of her own, a quiet disposition, and references that my mother said were the best she had ever seen. One of them was from a family she had worked for 11 years. 11 years! My mother said she knew right then. She hired her on a Tuesday, and by Thursday she said it felt like Kora had always been there. I met Kora for the first time at Christmas of 2004. I drove up from Charlotte with my husband Marcus and our oldest, who was 3 at the time, and when I came through the back door, Kora was in the kitchen with Mama, finishing the collard greens. She looked up, smiled, said, "You must be Simone. Your mama talks about you constantly." And then she turned back to the stove like that was the most natural thing in the world. I remember thinking she seemed warm, competent, like someone my mother could trust. I did not think much else about her for the next 18 years. She was there every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every time I visited. She faded into the background of my mother's house the way furniture does, present, necessary, unremarkable. That is the honest truth, and I am not proud of it. The thing about being comfortable is that it makes you careless. We were comfortable knowing Mama had Kora, comfortable knowing the house was running, the medications were managed, the groceries were bought. It freed us in a way we never examined too closely, to be less present than we should have been. Deshawn lived in Decatur, 40 minutes from Mama's house. He visited maybe 6 times a year, holidays and birthdays, and even then sometimes just for a few hours before he had somewhere else to be. He was busy. He ran his own construction company, had 3 kids of his own, coached Little League on Saturdays. He was a good father and a hard worker, and he loved our mother. I believe that completely. But love without presence is just intention, and intention doesn't hold your hand. Pamela lived in Savannah, about 4 hours away. She called every Sunday, which she was proud of, and she meant it as connection, but phone calls are not the same as showing up, and Pamela had a talent for turning every conversation back to herself, so even when she did call, Mama spent half the time listening to Pamela's problems rather than talking about her own. Renee lived in Houston. She was the busiest of all of us, or at least that was the story she told. 2 jobs, 3 kids, a husband who was in and out of the picture. She had real struggles, and I don't minimize them, but she went sometimes 3-4 months without calling, and when she did call, it was often to ask for something, advice, money, a listening ear for whatever crisis was happening in Houston that week. And me, I called twice a week. I visited 4 or 5 times a year. I thought I was doing well. I told myself Mama knew I loved her. I told myself that quality mattered more than quantity. I told myself a lot of things that helped me sleep at night. Mama always understood.
That was what I told myself. That Mama understood. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Mama had stopped telling us things years ago. Not because she was angry, but because she had simply learned what to expect. She had taken the measure of each of us, quietly and without drama, and she had adjusted her expectations accordingly. Deshawn called me on a Thursday morning in March of last year. His voice was strange, flat, which was not like him. He said Mama had been moved to hospice. I didn't know she was sick enough for hospice. I knew about the heart. She had mentioned something about her heart maybe 2 years earlier, said the doctors were keeping an eye on it, said it was nothing to worry about. And I had believed her, because I wanted to believe her, and because she had said it so calmly that alarm didn't seem like the appropriate response. What I didn't know was that in the 2 years since that conversation, she had been to the cardiologist 14 times. She had 2 procedures. She had been told clearly that her heart was failing and that she needed to start thinking about what she wanted her final months to look like. She had made all of those decisions alone, with Kora driving her to the appointments and sitting in the waiting room and bringing her home afterward and making her dinner and sitting with her while she processed whatever the doctors had said. None of us knew because she didn't tell us, and she didn't tell us because she already knew how it would go. I flew in from Charlotte that same Thursday afternoon. When I got to the house, Kora was there. Of course she was. She was in the kitchen making a pot of soup, moving quietly the way she always did, like she was trying not to disturb the air. She told me what she knew. She told me about the appointments, the medications, what the hospice nurses had said. She showed me the notebook she kept by Mama's bed, every appointment, every prescription, the name and direct number for every doctor, the hospice coordinator, the pharmacy, pages and pages of Kora's neat handwriting, organized and thorough and heartbreaking. Deshawn had visited twice in the past 4 months. He lived 40 minutes away. Pamela had sent flowers, a nice arrangement from an online florist with a card that said, "Thinking of you always." Renee called on Sundays, when she remembered. I sat at my mother's kitchen table that Thursday night, and I held Kora's notebook in my hands, and I understood, for the first time and far too late, what had been happening in this house while the rest of us were living our lives. Someone had been here. Someone had been showing up every single day for years, and it wasn't any of us. Mama passed on a Tuesday morning, 6 days after I arrived. It was early, just after 5. The hospice nurse had been there through the night. Kora had come at 4 in the morning because the nurse had called her. Kora was holding her hand. I was in the kitchen making coffee because I needed to do something with my hands, and I didn't know what else to do. I have thought about that fact every single day since.
The attorney's office called 3 weeks later to schedule the reading of the will. Mr. Ellis, Mama's attorney, had been handling her affairs for over a decade. He asked that all immediate family be present and that Miss Kora James be present as well. Deshawn didn't think much of that last part. He said it was probably just a formality. Maybe Mama had left Kora a little something, a token, a thank you. That was the word he used, token. We all came, Deshawn in his best suit, already calculating, already thinking about what he was going to do with his share, Pamela with her reading glasses and a yellow legal pad, because Pamela always came prepared for whatever she'd decided the meeting was going to be about, Renee, quiet for once, which should have told me something. Renee was never quiet, and me. I came because Mama would have wanted me there, not because I expected anything in particular. Kora came in a gray dress, simple, clean. She sat at the end of the table and folded her hands and waited. Mr. Ellis sat down, opened his folder, and began. He read through the standard language, the house in Stone Mountain, assessed at $412,000, the savings accounts, nearly $200,000 that Mama had accumulated over a lifetime of careful living, the investment portfolio, small but steady, worth another $90,000, the life insurance policy, the car, the contents of the house. He paused. He looked up from the document. He looked at Kora, and then he said it. He said, "Mrs. Whitfield has directed that 80% of the total estate, inclusive of the real property, the liquid assets, the investment accounts, and the personal contents of the home, be transferred in full to Miss Kora James, effective upon completion of probate." The room went silent for exactly 3 seconds, and then Deshawn said, "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Mr. Ellis repeated it, word for word, the same calm voice, the same pace. He had done this before. He knew what was coming. Deshawn was on his feet before Mr. Ellis finished the second reading. He said it was impossible. He said Mama would never. He said Kora had manipulated a sick woman, had been in that house every day, had gotten into her ear, had pressured her, had taken advantage. Pamela was writing on her legal pad. Renee was crying quietly into her hands. And I sat very still and felt something move through me that I didn't expect. Not anger, not shock, recognition. Like some part of me had always known this was coming. Like some part of me had understood on that Thursday night when I sat at the kitchen table holding Kora's notebook that my mother had already made her accounting, that she had looked at the life she had lived and the people in it, and she had made her decision with the same quiet precision she brought to everything. Mr. Ellis waited for Deshawn to finish. He reached into the folder and removed a sealed envelope, cream-colored, my mother's name written across the front in her own handwriting. He said, "Mrs. Whitfield anticipated that her decision might be difficult for her children to understand. She asked me to read this letter aloud if any of her children expressed confusion or objection." Deshawn said, "What letter? When did she write a letter?" Mr. Ellis said, "Approximately 14 months ago. It was witnessed, notarized, and has been held in this office since the date it was signed." He opened the envelope. He unfolded 3 pages of pale blue stationery. My mother's handwriting, small, careful, deliberate, the handwriting of a woman who had spent her life charting patient notes with precision, covered every line. He began to read. My mother did not begin with anger. She did not begin with a list of grievances. She began the way she began everything, with love, unqualified, undeserved by most of us, given anyway. She wrote, "To my 4 children, who are the greatest thing I ever made and the greatest heartbreak I ever survived, I am writing this because I need you to understand, and because I loved you too much to say it to your faces while I was still alive and risk making you feel guilty in a way that would help neither of us." She wrote about our father, about the year he died and what it took to keep going, about working double shifts and coming home to 4 children who needed things she was almost too tired to give, and giving them anyway. She wrote about the years that followed, about watching us grow and leave and build our lives, about how proud she was of every single one of us, individually and in detail. Deshawn's business, Pamela's stubbornness that she said reminded her of the best parts of their father, Renee's resilience, my steadiness. And then she wrote about getting older, about the knees first, then the heart, about the diagnosis in 2019 that she had not told any of us. She wrote, "I thought about telling you. I picked up the phone more times than I can count, but I knew how the conversation would go. You would be frightened for 2 weeks, you would call more often for a month, and then life would take you back, the way it always does, and I would be sitting in this house alone with it. And I decided I would rather not go through the hope of that, and then the silence after." And then she wrote about Kora. She wrote, "I want to tell you about Kora James because I don't think any of you ever really saw her. She has been in this house for 19 years. In that time, she has never once been late without calling. She has never once let me down when I needed something. She drove me to every doctor's appointment for the last 4 years. She sat in those waiting rooms, sometimes for 3-4 hours, and when I came out, she always had a coffee waiting, and she never asked me to tell me anything I wasn't ready to say. She ate dinner with me on the nights that the house was too quiet. She held my hand during the nights that scared me. She made me laugh when I thought I had forgotten how. I am not leaving this decision out of anger. I am not punishing any of you. I have thought about this for a long time, and I have made peace with it.
I am leaving because I believe that love is not a feeling. Love is a practice. It is a choice you make every day to show up for another person, even when it's not convenient, even when they can't give you anything back, even when no one is watching. And by that measure, the only measure that matters to me now, Kora has loved me more faithfully than anyone in my life outside of your father, and I intend to honor that honor. Then she turned to each of us. To Deshawn, she wrote, "You are the most capable person I have ever known, and I mean that without qualification. What you built with your own hands, and I am proud of you in a way I never said often enough. But baby, you live 40 minutes away. 40 minutes. I needed you and you came twice in 4 months. I don't say that to shame you. I say it so that you know, so that you carry that knowledge somewhere useful." To Pamela, she wrote, "You have your father's stubbornness and his pride and his absolute certainty that he is right about everything. Those qualities served him well until they didn't. I hope you learn what I learned, that being right is a cold thing to be when you are alone." To Renee, she wrote, "You always meant well, baby, I know that, but meaning well is not the same as showing up, and I spent a long time waiting for the difference to stop mattering. It never did." And to me, she wrote, "Simone, you tried. I know you tried harder than the others, and I want you to know I saw that. But trying from Charlotte twice a week by phone is still distance, and I spent the last years of my life in a house that felt very far from you. I hope you find your way back, not to this house, but to the habit of presence, to the understanding that the people you love need you in the room, not on the other end of a call." Mr. Ellis finished reading. He folded the pages carefully and returned them to the envelope. The room was the quietest room I have ever heard a room full of people be. Deshawn sat back down. His jaw was tight and his eyes were wet, and he was looking at the table like it had answers he hadn't found yet. Pamela's legal pad was in her lap. She hadn't written a single word. Renee was still crying, quietly, without trying to stop. And Kora was still sitting at the end of the table with her hands folded, still not smiling, still not crying. She had heard everything, and she sat with it the way she sat with everything, with patience and with stillness and with the absolute absence of triumph. I looked at her from across the table, and I said, quietly, so that only she could hear, "She loved you." And Kora looked at me and said, "I know. I loved her too." Deshawn retained an attorney within the week. He talked about undue influence, about mental capacity, about the power imbalance inherent in an employer-employee relationship. His attorney was thorough, and I don't doubt sincere. But Mr. Ellis had documentation that went back 14 months, 2 physician statements certifying my mother's mental competence, a recorded conversation, which Mama had apparently requested, in which she explained her reasoning to a witness in clear and articulate terms. She had thought of everything. Of course she had. She was a nurse for 31 years. She knew how to prepare for hard things. Deshawn dropped the contest 4 months later. Pamela and Renee did not speak to me for 6 weeks because I refused to join the legal challenge. I told them I was not going to stand in a courtroom and argue that our mother was wrong about who showed up for her. Pamela called that a betrayal. Renee said I had always thought I was better than them. I didn't say anything to either of them. There wasn't anything to say that the letter hadn't already said better. They came around eventually. Families usually do, once the anger burns down to ash and what's left underneath is just the truth, sitting there waiting to be looked at. I still think about that letter. I have read my portion of it so many times that the paper has gone soft at the folds. I think about the line that said, "Love is not a feeling, it is a practice." I think about all the years I practiced love from a distance and told myself it counted, told myself that Mama knew, told myself that my intentions were visible somehow, that she could feel how much I loved her even through a phone screen and a 4-hour drive. Somberly, I think about Kora in that guest room at 4 a.m. when the hospice nurse called. I think about what it means that someone who was not family, who owed my mother nothing beyond the hours she was paid for, became the person who was there at the end, who earned a place that the rest of us forfeited, not at once, but slowly, over years of choosing other things. I flew back to Charlotte about a week after the reading. Before I left, I stopped by the house one more time. Kora was there, beginning the quiet work of settling into the life my mother had left her, going through things, deciding what to keep, what to give away, what to hold on to. She offered me coffee. We sat at Mama's kitchen table and we talked for almost 2 hours, about Mama, about the early days, about little things I had never known, the way Mama laughed at her own jokes before she got to the punchline, the television shows she watched on Thursday nights, the letter she kept in the nightstand drawer from a patient who had written to thank her, years after she'd retired, for being kind during his worst week. I didn't know about the letter in the nightstand. I didn't know about the Thursday shows. I didn't know those things because I hadn't been there enough to learn them. Before I left, I asked Kora if I could take one thing from the house. She said, of course. Take whatever you need. I took the notebook from beside Mama's bed, the one with every appointment, every prescription, every name and number, page after page of Kora's neat handwriting, the record of 4 years of showing up. I keep it on my nightstand now. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because I needed something to hold that was real. Maybe because I wanted to carry the evidence of what it actually looks like when someone decides that another person's life is worth their time. I want to say something to anyone listening to this who recognizes something in Gloria's story. Not in the will, not in the money, not in the legal fight. In the quiet. In the space between what we mean to do and what we actually do. The people who love us are paying attention, not to our intentions, not to what we say about how much we care. They are paying attention to where we are when it matters, to who shows up, to whose number appears on their phone when the news is hard, to whose hand is in theirs when the night gets long. You cannot substitute for your presence, not with money, not with flowers, not with Sunday phone calls, not with meaning well from Houston. Gloria Whitfield spent 63 years giving everything she had to the people she loved, and in the end, she gave her final gift, the house she bought herself, the money she saved herself, the life she built herself, to the one person who had given her the same thing back. If this story made you think of someone, a parent, a grandparent, someone who is getting older while you are busy being busy, call them, not later, today. Go see them if you can, not because you owe them something, because love is a practice, and the time to practice is now, while there is still time. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Zuri Chronicles because every week we tell another story, another truth, another life that deserved to be witnessed. My name is Zuri, and I'll see you next time.